all. Welcome to Film Suck, a Patreon podcast in which we ponder the work of art in the age of crap cinema. I'm Eileen Jones, and my regular co-host Dolores is still busy making the world safe for opera, but she will be back in our next episode, which occurs in 2 weeks. So never fear, Dolores isn't lost to us forever. But I'm happy to say, in the meantime, today I have with us my friend Asali Echols. She's a documentary filmmaker and editor. And she's joining me to talk about the state of the documentary today, specifically the revival of Cinema Verite that she's been observing in her own, efforts and discussions, etc. That we were striving in vain to find, journalist coverage of, and so far there isn't anything. But it seems like it's really a thing, and we'll get into more of that in a bit. And we're interested in the tensions between that form, and especially, and the more traditional, what sometimes is referred to as the PBS-style documentary, that continues to dominate mainstream documentary financing, production, exhibition, etc. Asali has edited a number of feature documentaries in the Bay Area and Los Angeles. She's directed short documentaries, and she's currently directing 2 features called, am I going to say this right? Bureaucracy.
Yep.
This is what we're talking about here. Maybe we'll get into that a bit at the end. And Talking Tiki is the second one. She studied film at UC Berkeley and San Francisco State University, and also taught film production at San Francisco State. Asali was also my esteemed teaching assistant. I had a wealth of really brilliant teaching assistants, and they all have to come on this podcast. That's the rule. So that was for several of my classes at UC Berkeley in the film and media department, including my color theory class, my Disney Pixar class, my genre film class on Western noir, and I think there's a couple of others which we couldn't remember. Welcome to Film Suck, Asali.
Thanks, Eileen. It's good to be here.
Yes, finally, because I've brought it up a couple of times. I've never really pursued it hard. You've been very discreet about saying whether you'd love the idea or hate it. So I'm so thrilled that I've landed you at last. This is great. So just to start more focused, and then we'll get into the broader scope of what's going on with documentaries. And this was Asali's suggestion of a filmmaker named Elizabeth Lowe that we could focus on. She's a prominent figure in what we're arguing is this neo-cinema verite movement. She was born and raised in Hong Kong, but educated at NYU's Tisch School of the Arts and also at Stanford University. And you may have heard of her 2020 film, I believe it's her feature film debut, called Stray, about street dogs in Istanbul. Don't mix it up with the Will Ferrell dog movie called Strays, which if I say Strays, I really mean Stray. We're talking about Stray here. It got a lot of attention. It got a lot of awards. It got a pretty mainstream distribution deal and exhibition deal. So you may have actually seen it or heard of it. It's often described as a dog's eye view of the life of Istanbul's street dog population. And she has a second film called Mistress Dispeller, that's also won a number of awards on the film festival circuit, and it sounds super fascinating. I'm dying to see this one, and I'm sad it's not out yet. It's coming out in October, in late October. It's about a quote unquote love industry that's functioning in China. And it operates by sending an undercover operative who's hired by the wife. That seems to be how it works, to break up their husband's relationship with their mistresses. That's the real job. And so it just sounds fabulous. So again, late October is when it's opening. So I haven't been able to see it, but Asali has, so she can fill us in a little bit, and we can use it to that and Stray to talk about what Cinema Verite, what it is, what the history is, etc. But first, let's just talk a little bit about Mistress Dispeller and the experience of watching it, which you've seen some advance copies, so that's thrilling.
No, it's a trip. It truly does feel like a narrative film. The access, and I mean, I think the question on everybody's mind as you're watching it is, how on earth did this happen? Like, it doesn't feel real. I mean, it cannot be a doc. You think, how could this possibly be a real documentary? Because you're literally watching this whole thing unfolding. The film starts with a close-up of the wife's face as she's getting her hair done, and tears are just pouring down her face. And I mean, it's it's straight out of a Hollywood melodrama, really. And actually, the film is quite a melodrama, I would say.
Yeah.
So great. Yeah, and there's scenes of the way, so after the screening, the screening I saw was a Q&A. There was a Q&A with Elizabeth Lowe, and of course the first question they asked is, how did you do this? What were the ethics involved? This is so personal. How could you possibly subject these people to having this most kind of horrifying experience of their lives captured? And what they did was, they actually filmed with multiple couples. They filmed with about 6 or 7 couples, and because they were assuming people would drop out, and so they didn't force anybody to remain part of the thing. Well, anyways, long story short, basically there's this woman who has multiple clients, and they filmed with a bunch of different couples who are her clients. And the conceit of the woman is that she basically gets interwoven in this couple's life, but the husband doesn't know she's a mistress dispeller, and the mistress doesn't know that. She sort of masquerades as some friend who wants to learn badminton, and when will the husband teach her? And that's how she gets to know the husband. And what they told the couples while they were filming was that the work was just a film about sort of modern love in China, very vague. And so that was how they got the buy-in from all the couples initially.
Though in the end, she had to get permission in the end, right?
So at the end, she screened the film, or at least showed them their parts, and was like, as you know now, this is a Mistress Dispeller, and this is the film we were actually making. Are you still okay with this being seen by people? And they said yes, which is a miracle. The filmmakers were completely ready to pivot into something much broader about the love industry in China. They filmed at dating camps in the mountains, where they take all these single men off to the mountains and teach them how to be more, I don't know, viable dating candidates and whatnot. So they had, and the film has little interstitial moments of other things, like you see a little bit of footage from the dating camps, and you see some other stuff going on. But mostly it really follows this one love triangle unfolding in real time. And there's moments where it's just shocking what you are seeing unfolding in real time.
Well, and just, I read some about it and read some interviews with Elizabeth Lowe, and just to get some sense of the gist. And it does sound like this particular Mistress Dispeller becomes this kind of on-the-fly therapist for these people, as she's worked her way into their lives and through some way, but then it becomes this expansive talking about their hopes, their dreams, their longings, their needs, etc. Because isn't she trying ultimately often to reunite? She's trying to dispel the mistress and reunite the family.
Exactly.
So that's going to take some doing, which just sounds so much.
No, it's wild.
Completely wild. And so how does she pursue the Cinema Verite aspect? I mean, we should talk about what Cinema Verite is, I guess.
Yeah. Well, let me just tell you one funny thing about the therapist thing. I think I listened to an interview with Elizabeth Lowe somewhere where the Mistress Dispeller, Elizabeth Lowe said, watching this sort of made me feel like there was something therapeutic about watching all this. And the Mistress Dispeller said, I don't get why people in the US spend so much money on therapy for years and years and nothing ever happens. I actually get in there and do things and change people's lives and fix things and, put things back together. So I thought that was funny.
We don't have good therapists.
Well, yeah, this is a very interventionist type of therapy.
Sounds like.
But
so, what most people think of as Cinema Verite, I guess I should say, is, and this is just basically doing my little section on documentary in my film history class, which was very 101 basic kind of stuff. But basically, Cinema Verite has been collapsed together with the names of other cinema movements like direct cinema and uncontrolled cinema, and they all had slight differences. But what people mostly remember it for is being a kind of stripped down form that's fly on the wall, unobtrusive filmmaking. Cinema Verite actually had a more confrontational aspect to it. One of the founding film, generally in the canon, is the Jean Rouge, Edgar Morin Chronicles of Summer, which features a documentary filmmaker going up to various people on the street and demanding to know, "Are you happy?" Which is a provocative question, to say the least. And then later would bring them in and they'd watch their own answers and comment on them. And so it was a much less fly on the wall experience, but it got folded in together with things like direct cinema. And because it was contrasting with earlier forms of documentary, where it's quite normal to do staged reenactments, have songs playing over that with clearly emotional connotations to sort of all sorts of things to steer the viewer into feeling and thinking about what you're seeing in a certain way, voiceover narration, a lot of editing, but especially the stage scenes, the stage reenactments became verboten. For a lot of filmmakers for decades. And so eventually when you get to the point where you're starting to bring it back, bring these various techniques back, people start renaming what this is, or certain filmmakers start becoming famous for. So Errol Morris, for example, becomes famous for bringing back the staged reenactment, as well as all sorts of other stylized things, techniques that are the opposite of fly on the wall shooting. So is that more or less in the nutshell of what you think of?
I think these days the more common term than verite is observational cinema.
Observational,
and it sort of gets around the whole like confusion with cinema verite, and also verite meaning like truth, which we all know that's not a real thing in documentary at all ever.
So it was hotly debated then, because, and it is a problem, because if you deal with audience response at all to documentaries, God help us all, the prevalent naivete and the willing to accept as if this is the unvarnished, it's gone right into my veins. I mean, to my despair, audiences will even accept biopics, which are so fudged, so fictionalized, so ridiculously not the truth or just the facts or whatever people are thinking they're getting, that it's quite appalling. So that was a very hotly contested and debated issue, again, in this period of the 1950s through at least the end of the 70s, when there was all this work being done among documentary filmmakers to address exactly these issues. What would a fact even mean? What would truth even mean? Are we anywhere in that ball? What do we mean by to document something? How would you ever remove the subjective prejudices, the viewpoint of the person filming? Is there a way to somehow diffuse it? Blah, blah, blah. All of these questions were very burning issues for many, many years. So anyway, most of it is now consigned to the past. Lots of people have no idea it ever even went on. And even documentary filmmakers often, you feel like, don't seem to know or care that it ever went on. So anyway, sorry, that's in a rush.
No, it's actually interesting. I do think there's this new trend in these kind of stylized, I call them like they're just very stylish and beautiful observational docs. And it's interesting because they're very compelling, but there is no sense of that question of like, what is documentary and what are we doing here? There's no self-reflexivity, which I think there was a lot of during that period.
During that period, absolutely. Yeah.
And it's interesting whether these kind of observational docs, which do feel more, oh yeah, we are a fly on the wall, if those in some ways obfuscate the presence of the filmmaker more than, I don't know, like Errol Morris films, for instance, where
announces the presence. Yes.
You can often hear his voice. The camera, the person staring right into the camera with his Integratron thing, So,
and I think that was one of the responses to that whole debate or that quest to remove subjectivity, which of course is impossible. Good Lord, somebody's framing up the camera, if there's, to the extent that somebody's editing, somebody's choosing the cuts, somebody's choosing. So I think one of the arguments became then the more fact-based, the more truthful, if you will, approach would be to announce the presence of the film.
Right.
So when Michael Moore became very famous, and people were screeching. Some critics were a little screeching. How dare he? He's not presenting. This is not neutral at all. There he is. And I'm like, yes, there's his big fat face right there. It's always going to be there. He's announcing. For heaven's sake, he calls his first feature Roger and Me. It's all he puts himself in the foreground. There's a tradition behind that. That's a respected tradition. So anyway, I find documentaries maddening for this because if you don't even care about the basics of this, sometimes I'm really puzzled at what people are getting out of this, because how you do the unvarnished truth thing, I don't know, but people are very credulous, or often very credulous. So it's interesting to hear you describe the giant close-up on a woman's face, because when you think fly on the wall, you think a bit, or observational cinema, you might be inclined to think of famous examples like D.A. Pennebaker's Don't Look Back, even though that won't even. But there's long scenes that barely in focus of a camera just running while Bob Dylan, is rehearsing, or he's talking to the press or whatever, and he's sounding off, and it goes on, and there are no cuts. It just runs and runs and runs, and so you get the feeling, whether however true or not, though it does seem like it's a goal often of observational cinema filmmakers, to be forgotten. They hang around, they shoot so much, they hang around so much with the subject that after a while, people forget they're filming, the idea is maybe. And certainly that rough, slightly out of focus, not that composed style seems there to underscore observational cinemas. You were just letting this thing run.
Right.
And run and run and run. So is that how it's working at all in Mistress? Doesn't sound like
it. Yeah, and so there, I think it alternates between sort of more cinematic moments like that, and then moments where they truly did just let the camera run.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of scenes of like the husband, the wife, and the Mistress Dispeller, or just the husband and the wife sitting in their kitchen talking. And in those cases, apparently they just set up the camera on a tripod and left the room.
And they left. Perfect. That's perfect.
But, so, of course, they're still doing the artful work of where do you put the camera? What's the framing? Which in this case is quite a long, very symmetrical, beautiful shot of the kitchen table. So it doesn't have that janky, like, oh, we just camera just turned on. But, because they left, I mean, obviously the people were still aware there was a camera there. It wasn't a hidden camera, but there were no humans there behind the camera that
watching,
possibly be distracting the people from having whatever conversation.
Okay. Yeah. So that was my question. Are they doing the kind of long held?
Right. Very much so. There's and Elizabeth Lowe in one interview said she really doesn't like it when documentaries try to do the, replicate fiction films by having, like, oh, here's the shot of the husband talking, and then we're going to cut to the shot of the wife listening, because it's like, well, that, clearly you then had two cameras or completely faking that listening shot because you snagged it from somewhere else. So they wanted to try to get an authentic, single shot of just whatever was happening in that moment.
Right. Yes.
And there's actually a moment later in the film I just was thinking about where they actually acknowledge the film crew, because it's sort of at the climax, so I won't spoil what's about to happen, but the Mistress Dispeller sort of says, there is a film crew here. Do you want them here while this thing is about to happen? And the people are okay with it, but that's interesting.
Yeah. That's so sudden. Yeah. No, that sounds fabulous. Okay. Yeah. So I'm trying to think, and of course I was going to bring up, we've already kind of talked about the ethics of the thing, which is, this is a particularly pressing case.
Right.
But, frankly, documentaries tend to be amazing because of what people will allow to happen.
Yeah.
Whether, even if they initially agreed and then things unfold, that they're often, I think that's what the gold that documentary filmmakers are looking for. If nothing ever happens, it might be a pretty dull documentary. But that people do kind of forget their own, how you can be lulled into a false sense of security. You use, the most famous example being, again, Errol Morris, recording all of his conversations with, there's two people on death row, and there's one that, the film is going to wind up arguing is innocent. And then there's one who's going to wind up admitting essentially on camera that he did the murder. Really almost, it literally opened up the case again and got the the first man off death row and saved him from being executed for a crime he didn't commit. That's the claim to fame of The Thin Blue Line, Errol Morris's most famous film. So even as you're watching it, when you're first watching it, you're just jaws hanging open. Like, is he really going to confess? Is he going to confess? But you can tell he's talked so much to Errol Morris, and it has a kind of strange late night feeling of people who've been talking for hours, and their resistance is low, and it's just going to start to come out. Don't ever talk to someone with a camera in your face. I say this to all of you. Don't let film crews in your house. Don't talk to people with cameras in your face. Once you've been on the other side, you're just like, ah! There's so much control in the hands of the filmmakers that it's quite terrifying. But, Elizabeth Lowe has a very interesting set of stances that she seems to take going into film. Certainly with Stray, if you read up all about Stray, she keeps getting quizzed in Q&As about the ethics of what she's presenting in terms of the lives of these street dogs, how she's presenting them, and kind of what the philosophy behind it is. And she's very stalwart about the stances she takes. I don't know if it's the same thing as happening with or is required, or seems to be required by Mistress Dispeller, or Dispeller. I did it again. I keep calling it Mistress Dispeller. Sorry, Dispeller. Was she actually at the Q&A that you saw, or was it?
Yeah. She was there. Yeah. Uh-huh. And I mean, I think the ethical, they were very clear that they, like I said before, they filmed with multiple couples because they assumed many of them would drop out partway through, and they weren't going to force anybody. And they showed them the film at the end and got their buy-in, and it was all seemed very ethically.
Yeah, but at least she went on being very concerned with it, and that she uses in one of her answers in an interview, that the goal is to be observational, not interventionist. So as much as possible, you're not trying to you're not trying to nudge a narrative to go one way or another. And that is helped by the idea of you're observing many couples, and different things are going to emerge, and you're going to have to make whatever your decisions in the cutting room.
Right.
Of course. And, it sounds like the same thing happens on Stray. She's following many dogs.
Right. Exactly.
And so it takes her years following at ground level. I forget how many she lists, how many main dogs. They were following many, and then narrowing it down to like whatever, maybe 7. And then in the end, they wind up with, there's really 1, but then there's kind of, there's 3 altogether that are the main dogs. But yeah, she's got very strong takes, and she's got strong debates about Stray. Oh, what's that?
What?
Oh, I don't know. We were having some crazy, I don't know, ghostly. There's a ghost in the machine. We'll just ignore it. So let's kind of shift over a little bit. No, one other thing I wanted to say about Mistress Dispeller. She's been quoted as saying a big influence on her, and she says this about her other film as well, but about Mistress Dispeller, that Chantal Akerman's Jean Dielman is one of the influences, just in terms of, if you know Jean Dielman, which is now considered the greatest movie ever made, according to the BFI. That name. Wow. Greatest movie ever, dispelling Vertigo? It was Vertigo.
Yeah, right.
And before that, I'm forgetting what it was. But yeah, it's a ludicrous thing, but people take these things seriously. But anyway, it's a great film, but it's long takes, fixed frames, and domestic settings that elevate women's stories and emotions. So if you know how fixed the camera was the longest time in Jean Dielman, you know what you can picture. And indeed, you could hardly think of a more observational stance, except for the fact that always such beautifully composed shots.
Yeah.
So that seems to be a goal for her. Okay, so let's just shift over a little. Should we overview a little bit anything more about the more traditional form that has all come back? Almost all the practices of the traditional forms have come back. That were eradicated, including stage scenes and reenactments that seemed like the last thing people really objected to that, because it seemed just outrageous to be staging scenes and then claiming it for fact. But it was completely common practice at one, famously Nanak of the North.
Right.
Everybody knows that when they're wrestling with a seal to pull it out, the seal's dead. It's a staged scene. They don't even hunt that way anymore. They made them go get out their old hunting equipment and do hunting the way their forebears had done it. There was many things about Nanak of the North that were staged, but it's not they were all being staged. It was normal.
Right. Yeah.
And partly there were issues of equipment. One of the things that allows people to start experimenting and feeling like we can really revolutionize the documentary in a good way is there's a huge shift in what the equipment that's available. So when you get to post-World War II, there's been all this documentary filmmaking like crazy to deal with the war. They've got much more portable equipment. They've got sync sound is wonderfully easy to handle now. Cameras are lighter, film stocks are faster. I'm trying to think, there's like 10 other things. Though they wind up coming up with the zoom lens so that you don't have to keep bringing your camera intrusively in closer and closer. You can just zoom in a spy-like way on conversations that are far away and people and interactions that are far away. So all of this stuff allows for the observational style, you could argue. Now you can actually do it in a very practical way that wasn't going to be so. There used to be like things they'd try to get, I don't know, they'd be documenting something awful, a safari, killing animals in some exotic land, bedeviling some poor lion in Kenya, whatever. And that would get a lot of attention, but of course they'd have to restage and a faked up killing of a lion. I'm just making this up, but it was that kind of thing. Because how else are you going to do it without, you're going to get footage of somebody getting thrown off their feet. It's not going to work out as well. So that, again, common practice. It's a strange thing now that there's this, I don't know if you use this colloquially, there's this term, the hybrid documentary.
Oh yeah. That was a big thing thrown around at SF State in my MFA program.
Yeah, it's such a grab bag of a term that I was a little confused because it not only takes in, you're using narrative codes from narrative, like fictional films. You're taking techniques. You're taking very familiar ways of approaching topics that are fictional. So an example would be Citizen 4, documenting Edward Snowden's, fleeing, absconding with government information in order for a good cause, in order to reveal it to the world, and but he's on the run, and it deliberately evokes film noir in all of these shots, and it really sets it up to be a kind of action-packed, kind of thrilling, dark, clandestine, noir-esque world that he's entered into. There's also shots and ways of handling it that look like that. Or Dirty Wars, in which Jeremy Scahill kind of plays himself as this troubled but intrepid reporter getting the lowdown on harrowing Middle Eastern wars that are often being kind of secretly waged by America and perhaps other Western countries. Horrifying. No one ever even hears about them. Congress never votes on them, etc. But he literally there were literally staged scenes in which he'd be like shopping in a grocery store, traumatized because he's back from the wars. And it's remarkably similar to what you would have seen in Hurt Locker, where he can barely handle having to do grocery shopping because it's such a mundane and yet, visually overstimulating task and stuff. And you're just watching it going, I can't believe they're doing this. It's like, it's a Ben Affleck movie, but they've just made Jeremy Scahill. And if you read the critics' responses to this, nobody seemed to object, mind, notice, think that was weird. So felt like someone screaming in the wilderness. This is the most bizarre thing ever. What the hell are you doing? You don't have to make up drama about this. Wouldn't you just want to document how the horrifying nature of these wars that he's actually covering? He doesn't have to fake it. He's actually doing it. So I don't know. But so that's the main part of the definition as far as I can get. But it also pulls in things like staged and reenacted work. So you'll have people saying, well, Nanak of the North is a hybrid, or is it hybridized? Hybrid documentary.
Hybrid, I think. Yeah.
Which is odd to me because you'd have to say that about every film made before, I don't know, before 1955.
that was just them trying to do a documentary and not really knowing any. I mean, like that was before any type of documentaries existed.
That's what I mean. So it seems odd to do it retroactively. We're going to impose this term on films.
Right. I mean, I
Yeah.
think to me, like, some of the animated documentaries I think are good examples
Mhm.
of that,
Oh,
where
yeah.
like those ones I can get behind because it's like that's actually kind of a neat way to, I mean, especially I think hybrid documentaries come into play when you really just don't have the footage and you're never going to get the footage.
Right.
You
Mhm.
know, observational documentaries are a really hard form because you actually have to be there for like a year
Yeah.
capturing what's happening in real time. It can only exist for a story that's happening in real
Right
time.
now.
If
Right.
it's something that happened in the past that someone can tell you about,
Mhm.
you're limited as to how you can show that. And so that's where I think the hybrid form
You're pretty much going to be reliant on interviews, and
interview,
then you can illustrate them with if there's older
right?
footage or if there's older
Right.
photos or if
I
there's older.
mean, Burns, you know what to do,
You know
right?
what to do. When you want to deal with the Civil War, someone's going to read one of those heartrending letters, and we're going to start panning slowly over old photographs. We know the move. And by the way, in that 50s to the 70s period, direct cinema forswore all that. There was to be none of that.
Exactly.
None of that kind of thing. So it did cut out certain types of filmmaking that you could do at all, but it was very forbidden for a while there,
Right.
because again of its manipulative qualities. You're
Right.
basically telling the audience what to feel and what to think and everything else. Yeah. So yeah. So the fraught case of the interview, like, so if you're cinema verite, you don't love the interview, I'm assuming.
No.
You don't want to do the interview.
No.
Unless it's others talking, you don't want to be yes, because
I mean,
that's not observational in a
the
way.
ideal the thing with Cinema Verite is it takes 10 times longer because you're basically waiting for whatever your themes or the ideas
Yeah,
you're interested in exploring to come out in real life, ideally visually, like showing, not telling, or someone having a conversation, but you can't force it. So,
right,
you're just waiting around for like, I mean, you could be shooting for years before
right,
you get what you need.
right,
Whereas, I mean, the interview is clearly more efficient in the sense that
right,
if you want to ask someone something, you sit them down and you have a conversation. I mean,
right.
I've seen there's off like I think a lot of films nowadays that don't want to do a sit down. I think the talking head is the thing that's really reviled now
Yeah,
in hip observational cinema circles.
because
You know,
it's so completely associated with what you might call a PBS style, or
exactly.
if you just go online on Hulu, on Max, on just documentary, they're entirely reliant on that form, on the talking head form.
Right.
That's what most people expect of a documentary, for
Yeah,
sure.
I mean, especially talking heads that are like experts,
Mhm.
sitting in their office with a out of focus row of books behind them,
Or a
espousing
wooden screen.
their you
Yeah,
know.
yeah.
But I mean, so yeah, I mean that I think is the thing that. But I have seen some sort of more contemporary verite-ish documentaries do like interviews while someone's driving and they're like discussing something to
Mhm.
the filmmaker, and it's not a talking head per se, but it's still you're getting some of that sense of, or like an interview where a kid is sprawled on their bed on their phone and it's
Mhm.
very casual and feels unstaged,
Right.
so there are
There are
opportunity
ways of
interview-ish moments even in these kind of
right. Well, it's
contemporary.
interesting because again, not to harp on Morris, but he seems so set on taking on the rejection of certain techniques that he forcefully brought them back, and so he made a huge deal about, of course, the interview. But he used his own special device, the Interatron, so that basically people who are talking would think they're talking directly to him. They see his face when they're talking. So that's why you get that intense eye contact and that incredible feeling of them talking so direct, instead of that sort of vague, looking slightly off camera thing you get in most talking heads interviews. He'd always have them against an absolute white screen so that they're like, butterflies like pinned to a screen. You get this feeling, and he called it the Interatron because, he really meant he would hold on people to the point. He had something called the 3-minute rule. So you ask a question and you literally wait for 3 minutes. And if they give a 2-word answer, then they're sitting there for 3 minutes. And it's because he, out of trial and error, he discovered the strongest will break. They'll break. They can't sit there for 3 minutes. They'll start talking again, and you'll start to get more and more revealing stuff the longer you hold on people. So anyway, he had techniques for re-enlivening and making strange the whole experience of the talking head interview, making it seem like it's not quite the talking head interview anymore. But it's still very, very stridently the interview that he's insisting on. So he's sort of tried to make himself a special case in this. So instead, you're saying it's much more like if you can make it seem like they're talking on the fly in a way that's not an interview, a constructed interview, that's more acceptable. I mean, it's also tricky because you really can, if you can get people talking, you really can get revelatory things.
Right. Well, see, this is where I'm sort of feel conflicted about. I mean, I love all these verite films. I think they're beautiful. And in a way, it feels more like watching a fiction movie because you're just seeing things happening. You're watching. You're not listening to what someone has to say about these things. It's a very different experience. And I mean, there's some really beautiful verite films that have great access and, there's beautiful close-ups of people doing things, Honeyland, with the bees. I mean, it's like, I personally like the interview often because you get to hear some really revelatory things. And you also get to hear how people present themselves, which I think is kind of interesting. And if you can find the right people who sort of, I don't know, have a self-presentation, like Grizzly Man, for instance, Grizzly Man is all about self-presentation.
Oh my God. Timothy Treadwell, who can ever forget this constant, desperate self-presentation of Timothy.
But I mean, that movie would be so different as an observational film. It wouldn't be nearly as interesting. That access to his weird mind and that makes it what it is.
And performance style. He had been a would-be actor, right? Hadn't he? Hadn't he wanted to be a star of some kind, if I'm remembering right? And he certainly is setting up camera. You got Herzog's camera, and then you got him setting up his own camera and then posing in front of it and talking to it, and as if he's a kind of star on a kind of his own wild kingdom. And you're right. I think self-presentation, whether it's somebody breaking down and saying more directly confessional things or simply, oh my God, this is how they think they're presenting themselves to advantage, can be horribly revealing. Just to stare in fascination at people. You can really, it's almost like there's almost more gotcha sometimes in just letting people, feel comfortable in, yes, this is my public persona and I am proud to present it. It can be very, that can be an exciting reveal. But it also, of course, gives people some rights, as much as it may seem the more exploitative thing, it also gives people some right to finally get a say in. It's more than what the filmmaker would put in their mouth.
Totally. And that's kind of what I've actually had long arguments with some of my contemporary colleagues who, are very much in the school of it must be observational and immersive and interviews are bad and they're passe and cliche. And it's like, actually, I think it's kind of rude almost to just follow someone around for 3 weeks filming them and not hear what they have to say about things.
Right.
Obviously, it depends on the contract you have with that person and the discussions you've had. But I've had a lot of instances of interviewing people where at the end, they actually are very happy. They thank me. They said, wow, talking to you about this made me understand how I think about it differently and sort of clarify my thoughts. And it was even therapeutic, which that's, not the goal. I'm not trying to be someone.
Yes.
But I do think we are humans. Language is the primary way we communicate. And so I don't think we should entirely eschew the interview because it's passe, because there's, that's a lot of how we figure things out is by talking about them.
Right. Well, and you can get some really unexpected effects as well. I mean, that's a kind of straightforwardly affirming effect. You get somebody who gets to work through their own take on what all this is about, that is the subject of the documentary. But if you look at something like the Pee-wee as himself documentary, which I talked about last time with another friend and another former teaching assistant, Michael Delabout, M. Delabout. I keep messing up his name. Damn it. Uh, there's the biggest tension in the film is that the way the film is being done by the director Matt Wolf is really not the documentary that Pee Wee Herman / Paul Rubens once made. He initially wanted to direct it himself. He was persuaded not to, and he's just kind of fighting Matt Wolf the whole way, saying over and over, "I know what your agenda is. I know what it is, and it's not what I would prefer." And so there's all this fascinating tension, and there's all these ways that Paul Rubens, being a kind of artful performer, plays on revealing aspects of himself, taking it back again. Is that what I say I am? Is it not? Is it? Because he doesn't want to be one, at least what I'm getting out of it, he doesn't want to go into the box that he feels Matt Wolf has got all set up for him. And so he's going to find every possible way to dance around in a sometimes overtly hostile way, like an outright angry way. It's really the most fascinating aspect of the whole thing, is his self-definition versus Wolf's, the shaping hands of Wolf defining him in another way. So I guess that's another thing you can consider, is there might be a certain amount of tension between, and that might be very interesting in and of itself. Like, what is the nature of why call it Pee Wee as himself? We're not even going to call it Paul Rubens, as himself. So anyway, I think there's a lot of effects that can be gotten, and it seems a shame to take any aspect of the documentary form and say it's out and never again. That just seems an odd. I think there's always a way to bring back aspects of techniques and say there might just be a better way of going about this that's useful.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't think anyone's banning interview, but I mean, I really think most of the films that are making waves and the anointed new guard of documentary filmmakers are working in this observational mode, which is
so. I'm so glad you've observed this, because I know almost nothing about what's going on just in the last several years, say since 2020. So let's talk a little bit about that, because again, as I mentioned earlier, we both made our effort to kind of research this, and we aren't finding articles, we aren't finding people claiming this as a movement yet. But Asali's having experiences and can point to films saying, "Oh no, this is very much a going concern," and there's tension between the people who consider themselves observational filmmakers versus those who are still working in the old guard form.
Totally. I mean, I think I saw Mistress Dispeller as part of SF Film has like a documentary series in October, and it was preceded by maybe 4 or 5 shorts, and they were all observational.
Right.
I mean, really, all of it. And it's the hottest, young documentary talent, and it's like, wow, that's interesting,
Yeah.
And the funny, so I work with a lot of filmmakers who came of age in the PBS era of like, sit someone down and you do the interview, and then you might to get some B-roll, and B-roll is a whole nother conversation, right? I mean, I assume people know what B-roll is.
Well, but explain anyway.
So if you watch a newscast, the A-roll is the interviewer explaining what's happening, and the B-roll is the shots that you see to like illustrate what's happening. And it's very like, hear a dog, see a dog, but like in most PBS documentaries, it's a little more subtle than that. But still, you'll see it talking head for 2 seconds, and then it'll cut to some shots of various things that help explain and whatever. And sometimes, and this is something that maybe we really should do away with, like you after you do your interview with someone, you'll film them walking, because you need B-roll shots of them doing things. And so you'll just like say, walk down the hallway, and this can be 100% abolished and no one.
That sounds awful, but I know exactly. I can picture the shot. Oh my god!
Or like thumb through your bookshelf and and pretend you're looking, you just make up some weird activity for them to do so that you have something to cut to. Because really, let's be honest, the reason you cut to B-roll is because you're cutting something out of what they're saying. You would stay on the talking head, except that either they start hemming and hawing and saying a lot of ums and you want to clean that up, or you're literally splicing together to you're Frankensteining whatever they're saying, not necessarily bad and like immoral way, but you're just trying to make your point as effectively as possible, and they ramble on and on. So
it allows you to segue, in other words, to something,
to the B-roll because you need to.
Oh, that's great. My favorite one example is in Dirty Wars, where Jeremy Scahill, I forget what's going on. I can't even remember if that film has voiceover narration, but whatever, or there's just mournful music playing or something, but he's literally standing in front of a map of the world, putting in push pins wherever there's a dirty war happening. And you can just practically hear somebody directing him, just, okay, look really sad.
Right.
And he looks really mournful as he puts in more and more push pins, and you're like, come on. It's so embarrassing. It's really embarrassing.
Well, yes, and I think it's the I think there was a level of this that was reached with these PBS documentaries.
Yeah.
That this kind of
cringe factor.
Like embarrassing that's I think I think that's why all these young hip filmmakers are making observational films and eschewing all that. And it's like, well, if we can't do that, right, let's just not talk to anybody and we'll just watch the world happen and make something artful and beautiful from that.
Right. From that, yeah. Which is a good segue to Stray.
Yeah.
If you've seen it, if you haven't, it really commits to street, very much down at the height level of dogs on the street. It gives you a backache to think about filming it, how the filming went. I don't exactly know, but it's right down there with the dogs, and as much as possible, just observing them going about, and she of course has a million hours more, that she could have chosen from, that is painstakingly winnowed down and winnowed down and winnowed down. Again, even to from the huge number of dogs to just the 3 dogs, and just certain sequences, and it's very loosely cobbled together. So, many critics talk about how there doesn't seem to be any, story per se. It's just, well, it goes on. The life of the street dog seems to build to a sort of moment of sort of belonging and happiness that falls apart abruptly, and then you get just more life of the street dog, especially the dog. Zaytin is the name. You'll never forget Zaytin's face. Very, very mournful, but very, very regal in its dignity. And I guess she was partly chosen because she wasn't very clingy. She didn't sort of adhere to the filmmakers. She just went her own way in this kind of resolute way. So you could film her and she'd just look off, thinking her own, whatever her own thoughts are, presumably looking off and paying not a lot of attention. So that kind of quality of independence and self-reliance, etc., as the dogs move about the streets. And the most that happens beyond just seeing how dogs interact with each other, how they get food. It's a very tolerant city. There's actually now a law. You can't among the few kind of directives you get at the beginning of the movie, and that's pretty much all you're getting. You're getting little quotes from like philosophers like Diogenes about, admiring quotes about dogs. There's something at the very beginning just alerting you that, there once was pretty brutal policies about strays, killing them and trying to eliminate them, and then it flipped, and now the law is you can't hurt them, you can't kill them, and you can't even try to capture or detain them. They're just to be allowed to live amongst you. And, so a lot of people, give them food on the street, etc., but they're there fending for themselves, living their dog lives, basically. And that, again, when there's human interaction, it's a very firmly kept background. So you're often kind of overhearing people talking. Whatever they happen to be talking about. So for a while, the dogs are, they seem to like to get together with these boys who are unhoused, these Syrian refugees from Syria. and they seem to have common cause, and they like to hang around together. So periodically they get together. But yeah, human conversation, occasionally directed at them, a lot of times not directed at them, alert you to there's all these things going on. There's a feminist protest march, there's something else, but it's all because it's all background to the dogs' lives, but they don't, it's nothing to do with them and their hunt for food or their hunt for whatever it is they're hunting for, whether they're going. So anyway, that's the enormous strength and power of the film, is how strongly she commits to pretty strict ways of approaching this subject. And you can contrast it to a film like Keddy, which again, I'm glad you reminded me of, because I hadn't seen either of these. So I watched some sequences from Keddy, which is about the cats in Istanbul also running around. But in that case, it's a much more traditional documentary in that it's got all the, it films from all sorts of different heights. It's got a very human perspective. It starts with voiceover narration, talking about how cats enrich the lives of Turkish people in Istanbul. They're irreplaceable, blah, blah, they're a big part of the life there. And then it's tons of interviews with people about the relationships they have with these cats that are all over the place. There's a lot of musical score, songs setting the terms for sequences. There's a very upbeat sequence it's all montaged. It's very cutty, about different cats in some sort of setting and blah, blah, blah. And then they're all slower, more meditative, so there's all of that stuff is being used. That's kind of very firmly walled out of Stray. So it's an interesting comparison, but it does seem, ultimate verite as you're going to get in a film about street dogs, seems like. What did you think of it?
Yeah, I mean, I really enjoy it, mostly because it's beautifully shot, and dogs are fun to watch.
Yeah.
Honestly, like, my favorite moments are just these little moments of dog drama, like when the dog takes the other dog's bone.
Yeah. Keeps taking them.
The best part about that is what's cool. What I think is cool about this film is it actually shows the people of Istanbul as being very much caring for these stray dogs and respecting them. And so these dogs are battling over this bone, and this guy comes over and tries to intervene. And he's like, "Asshole, why won't you share?
Why won't you share?"
It's funny to see these sort of dog dramas, becomes human dramas too.
Yes.
Yeah. And I mean, I thought when I first watched it, I was like, oh, this movie's brilliant because, it's sort of taking on the Syrian refugee crisis, but in a super subtle, sly way. You think you're just going to watch a movie about dogs, and then the dogs lead you to this other marginalized group that's also living on the streets. And it's these young Syrian boys who really care for the dogs and give them their, chicken that they've from the free food, a food distribution thing. And so, yeah, this time when I watched it, I still really enjoyed it. I did feel, there are moments where you're like, okay, I'm just watching dogs, and that's the nature of verite, right? Is you kind of can lose the thread, I think. And I think this is a divisive movie. I can imagine showing this to people who would get bored within 5 minutes and turn it off. And I mean, it kind of makes you call into question, what is a documentary film for? Or what is any film for? What is it trying to do? Because this movie, well, yeah, you can whatever you want to say about that.
I was just going to chime in that, I was so curious about how it was that I went and read some reviews and I read commentary just to see how are people, taking it. I know how I'm taking it, but, and it was interesting because, and then she also gives interviews in which she's clearly addressing some of the responses. Like she says her least favorite response that she got over and over was these dogs are treated better than the boys, than human beings who live on the street. And she just kept going, she said she really disliked it because she was trying to break down this whole human, special, important dogs. So to elevate the dogs in terms of treatment, and you're like, how are they're being treated the same? isn't the point that they're all these kind of marginal figures that are on the street, but it's just people's indignation, or at least some people's, are more in terms of it's somehow outrageous that the dogs are also getting to eat free food and these boys are getting, to the extent that they eat it all, and no one's making a special thing about saving the boys. So she was really emphasizing, I'm trying to break down the anthropomorphizing. We think we know what dogs think and dogs are, so let's rethink. She says we don't give dogs credit enough, for example, for being very intelligent and self-sufficient, and for having independent lives from us. And so that's something we can get into. We can talk about this. And she's trying to break down waste, particularly American, but Anglo-American, Western European points of view about animals, pets,
right,
place, both the sentimental kind and other kinds. And so she had a lot of philosophical stances she wants to address through this movie. But there are people who are like really objecting strongly in that she doesn't seem to care in this non-interceding thing, which is this is very observational. You do not intercede no matter what happens in front of you, which often can seem horrific to people. Glenn Kenny is the critic who really was objecting, just like, how can you not intervene on behalf of the dogs, the boys? You're just like, which seemed a little odd and extreme, but I kind of know what he means, in that part of me was like, I became sort of aware watching, just because I was part of dog rescue for a little while, and I have rescued, of like, there's no way there aren't occasionally dogs getting hit by those cars. It opens with a scene of the main dog, Zayton, somehow has gotten herself in this there's traffic everywhere, and she's on this tiny, narrow little island. You can't imagine how she got there, but she's stuck, and you don't know how she's going to get out, and the movie never shows you how she gets out. But it's at the beginning of the movie, so you're just like, sorry, my dog is hot. So you're just hoping you're just assuming, because you see her later, she came out fine. Right. But that kind of thing where you're like, just if you follow, rescue sites and stuff, there's dogs get injured, dogs are starving. There are many dogs that are not self-sufficient. You're just kind of like, there aren't any sick dogs in this movie. There aren't any. My dogs are chiming in at this point, very emotional, obviously. There's no sick dogs. There's no injured dogs. There's nothing that's going to stop you and make you clutch your head and go, oh my God, what's going to happen if someone doesn't help this dog? Okay.
Well, that's an interesting point. I listened to one interview where she talks about, she used these vintage Cook lenses, and really wanted it to be cinematic. And she used the word Hollywood multiple times. Like, I want it to feel like like. Oh,
and saying Zayton was the star dog. Because clearly had star quality.
But yeah. Like, it had almost a Hollywood feel, in the sense that it really is elevating these dogs. As, look at these amazing beacons of free life and all this stuff. But like, you're right. It can't be all that rosy all the time. Yeah. And so that's a choice, even though it's observational, the editing of this is huge choices constantly,
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so she still has a very much a point of view and a perspective. And
yes, imposing on the material, which she's going to have to, keep in mind, that was one of the torturing factors of those years of experiments. Finally coming down to like, look, no matter what you do, you still made directorial choices that are subjective. There was literally somebody who would hurl a camera into a room, and then whatever subsequently happened in the room, so that they could say, I didn't even frame up the shot. And it's just like, well, you still took the shot. You still presumably tacked it onto a few other shots, and you still, whatever. There's still an imposition on the material. You're never going to completely eradicate it, though you can have it as a goal to eradicate it as much as you can. But here it clearly isn't even the goal.
No.
You do have long takes. You stay for a very long time on just unfolding scenes that do not seem to have interference of any kind. But again, just even staying kind of respectfully down on the level of the dogs, which, for example, Ketty does sometimes, but definitely will jump up and be human height all the time, or overview, or all that kind of thing. She's announcing kind of very strict choices and a very strictly focused point of view. But yeah, you can wind up questioning you watch. But I think that might even be part of it. You become so aware of, oh, she's really got a take
Right.
on dogs, on these dogs anyway, in this situation, and
Right.
that's what she wants us to focus on. And
And
so
the like
we
black,
appreciate that.
no, totally. And the black screens with the like Diogenes quotes obviously
Mhm.
keep announcing to you that this is
Elevated,
a film.
elevated.
There's
Yeah.
a philosophical idea. Can you find it? I don't
Mhm.
know.
Yes, exactly. And I forget, I meant to write down the quote and I've forgotten that she starts with it's Diogenes, and it's something that
Oh gosh, I don't
is
know. There were some really good ones.
elevating dogs over people often.
Right. Yeah, no, dogs are
Yeah.
more truthful than people. There was, I mean,
Yeah.
it'd be
There's
worth
a number
going
of
and looking at all those different quotes because they were
Yeah.
interesting. But
Yeah.
yeah,
But, if you want to have a major impact, that's one way. You get yourself a set of very strict techniques and you stay with them.
right,
Because, watching sequences from Ketty, it's just like immediately it has so much more generic. Like, so I could just feel my mind kind of going to sleep again. Whereas you feel challenged by Stray, even though there's
right,
no one announcing anything to you to challenge you. There's nobody talking. There's nobody advancing an argument in verbally, and you're not interviewing an expert who's going to make some sort of controversial claim. There's none of that. So it's just
right.
you in this seemingly this particularly kind of footage cut together in a particular way, and that's a couple of quotes, and that's it. So yeah, but I loved watching it, of course, because I can watch dogs forever. Compelling, completely compelling. But yeah, I did find myself doing in acts of mental argument periodically of like, okay, I don't know about this, that kind of thing, but not a lot, just because you've got to admire, and it's rare enough. And no wonder she made such a splash with this first film.
Right.
She's doing great for a documentary filmmaker, because the situation for documentary filmmakers is always more or less impossible. Um, you know,
Yes.
we had a very friendly era in the late the 80s into through the 90s, and maybe even slipping into the 2000s for a bit. There was a real golden age where a lot more than ever before were becoming mainstream film, must see film.
Right. Yeah.
It was very almost strange. You'd go to the Sundance Film Festival, and the hottest ticket, Grizzly Man was one. You could not get into Grizzly Man. I
Right.
wound up not seeing it. I tried twice. I had to
Wow.
wait after, because everyone had heard you must see Grizzly Man, but more and more it became that was the known hot ticket for
Hmm.
years. Which I don't know if that's still the case, but I'd be surprised, because it seems like that was just an era that didn't last anyway. I don't know, but couldn't last, but didn't last.
Yeah, I don't think so. I
Yeah.
mean, but there are breakout films like this, and
Right, exactly. There's
that
still films, but it's like, I don't know, Thin Blue Line, Roger and Me, what else? Crumb, Terry
right.
Zwigoff. There were just some films that became really mainstream. I think March
Did
of
you
the
see?
Penguins is the
Oh
last one
yeah.
I
Did you ever
remember
see
being.
Spellbound? The
Oh
one about
no, but I remember reading that became a
well, that
kind
was
of.
one of those ones that like
That
started
was
playing in theaters nationwide, and like
right,
for weeks and
exactly.
weeks. And I actually saw it when I was a kid. I mean that, and
Yeah,
it's great. It's actually a great film, but
yeah. I know. I remember it
it
being
was
out,
one
and
of
somehow I
those.
missed it. Yeah.
There was a whole bunch of those. I think like contest genre films, like Mad Hot Ballroom, which is about kids. I mean, and they're like it's a easy structure because you just follow a bunch of kids and then you see who wins.
Right. Oh wait,
And
wasn't there Hands on a Hard Body?
yes,
That was
that's That's exact. Yeah,
that's
that
right.
was a whole genre of documentary for a
Yes.
brief moment. And those were very commercially successful. I
Yeah.
think those have turned into reality TV shows.
Yes, 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 yes.
Yeah.
Well,
So
because there's a whole history of what happens, which I did not know. Because again, I stopped teaching, and I stopped paying attention to what was happening with the documentary. But yeah, the various things happen. It seems like people pin it on COVID a lot. That viewing choices. It practically kills theatrical exhibition, not 100%, but a lot. So that whole route of film festival to you're hoping some sort of mainstream distribution kind of begins to die, as people are relying more and more on what they can stream at home on
right,
TVs. That becomes what they're relying on, and streaming services start relying instead of on the film festival route and what's being picked by programmers and given awards and everything else. They're relying more and more on algorithms, well, for everything. So algorithmically, what the choices are now in there are lots of documentaries being made, but guess what they're about? True crime and celebrity portrait docs are the two big, must sees. And all you have to do is go on HBO again or one of the services and look at them, and you're like, that's most of them.
Yeah.
Um, so that way of making anyway, for some people, arguing that there was a very much longer golden age, and that's what killed it. And so now we're in a whole other post-pandemic era of documentary filmmaking
Yeah.
that's a little more desperate. Yeah.
Yeah, the funding situation is certainly desperate for
Yeah.
most people. But I mean, I really do think there is this new trend of these observational, like stylish, hip observational docs that,
Mhm.
we're going to be seeing more and more of. Like Folk Tales, the one I was telling you about the,
Right.
the Norwegian folk, like dog sledding high school where
Mhm.
kids just like get thrown into the Arctic and taught about Norse mythology. And, and
That
that
does sound like I have to see that one.
But I mean, like, there are going to be these few and far between movies like that get made,
Yeah,
and
it does seem like that's one result of the golden age thing, is that there's at least was enough of a conduit from into mainstream theaters that there's going to be an occasional breakout one. It's just that there were just much bigger numbers than there ever were that I remember before, and suddenly it became the kind of hip thing is to go to these movies, and it was hard to keep that going.
well, remember during the pandemic how Netflix started pumping a ton of money into documentaries like My Octopus Teacher and
Yes,
stuff.
everyone. That was the last must see one I remember, but that
Oh,
was
and
online.
everybody saw that. I don't know
Yes.
a single person who didn't,
Oh
but that
no,
movie had
everyone.
so much money pumped into it.
Yes.
I
Yes.
mean, to be honest, I think it suffered a little from the amount of money that got pumped into it.
Oh, you
It
mean even just by the look of the film?
Yeah, it felt a little too like I didn't, the drone shots of him walking to the shore. It's like that's not really helping me feel
Uh-huh.
connected to the story. You guys just had a huge budget from Netflix and wanted to use it on.
Right, right. Yeah, that makes sense.
But yeah,
Well,
but
it was like that was a killer because boy,
yeah,
talk about you want to talk melodrama, man. That had an emotional punch, man. I wanted to
yeah,
kill that guy. That guy was unworthy of that octopus. Totally unworthy.
totally.
And it's interesting because I do love the form, and I am frustrated by, well, streaming services. Who isn't? I mean, because now there's such a glut that apparently there's been some loss of funding since, as you pointed out, Netflix just went crazy, pumping money into it, and then they glutted the marketplace with documentaries, and so the bottom fell out again. But I guess it sounds like it's swiftly changing. So every time the bottom drops out, someone else decides to presumably invest some more. But yeah, so that's been happening too, to the point that I was watching somebody who's got a YouTube show. His name was Austin Meyer, and he's
Mm,
where is it? He works for National Geographic Explorer as a documentary filmmaker, and he was just charting, the change post COVID, and basically saying, well, what's of course suffering is the distribution of anything with controversial politics.
mm,
You're really seeing that dying out. So his example is the most famous of them is No Other Land,
right,
about what's going on in Gaza.
right,
And he just said that it's highly praised. Everyone's already, everyone who pays attention to film is hearing of it, but they can't see it because it can't get a distribution deal
right.
in the United States. And he says the same thing happened to a movie called Union, about unionizing, the first unionizing of an Amazon workplace. It didn't matter. It was winning awards in the film festival, all the things that would have once gotten it a distribution deal, almost certainly. It hasn't gotten it. So they literally just started doing their own they were just going to exhibit it, raise money to exhibit it in a theater by theater basis because they couldn't get a deal.
Oh, geez.
Such is the influence of Jeff Bezos, bastard. So,
Yeah. No,
yeah,
that's
so he
that.
gives a list of films that, you haven't seen and you might have to struggle a little bit to see because they can't get a deal.
Yikes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's troubling. I
Yeah.
mean, but not to mention, but getting to the point of even having a film to get a deal is
Right. It's amazing itself. Yeah.
even what's happening now with the funding situation. I'm very curious to see
Mhm.
what happens with documentary. ITVS basically has shut down because they've lost all
all
funding.
their funding.
I mean, PBS is on the brink of
losing their
collapse.
funding.
You know,
Yeah.
California, like all the NEH. I had a personal story of getting a grant from
Yes.
California Humanities Cut, which like that's me and 500 other. I mean, you know,
yes, you
like
actually won the award. Just said you got awarded a sizable chunk of money and couldn't
right,
collect because, of course, Trump had already cut the funding.
right. So, yeah, I mean, the thing is, we'll see how that plays out in the next 5 years with what kind of films are going to actually be made.
Right.
You know,
right, exactly. Yes.
So.
Do you want to share with us what your films are about? Because they sound so cool.
Sure. Just briefly, the film that got the funding cut, although actually we may have some good news on that, but I won't say anything because I don't want to jinx it.
Okay, that's understandable.
But yeah, that film is called Bureaucracy, and it's about wild boroughs in the West. And I mean, it's sort of a philosophical exploration of human-animal relations and what it means to live with our feral neighbors. And you know, all communities sort of have these animal neighbors that they deal with, whether it be deer, coyote, foxes, wolves in some cases. And in the West, it's burros who were brought by miners during mining booms in the 1800s and early 1900s, and then released into the wild to die, presumably, once modern technology came to mining. But burros are well adapted to life in the desert and have thrived. And so now there's big communities of feral donkeys or burros living in the West, creating all sorts of interesting problems and interactions with the humans who also live in the West. So,
right. Oh, that sounds fascinating. And how about Tiki Time?
So Talking Tiki.
Tiki Time.
You know,
I'm thinking of the cocktails that I would like to have.
Yeah, right. Well, our tagline for Talking Tiki is grab a drink and come along. So that is is about sort of this contemporary movement in tiki bars. There was sort of tiki basically was super popular from the 30s to the 50s and then died out almost entirely in the 80s. And then there was a revival in the 90s sort of by these three guys. And now there's this new wave of tiki bartenders and bar owners who are sort of taking the genre and transforming it and making it more sort of less appropriative, less what you think of as tiki with like big Polynesian masks everywhere, which, you know, and part of the film is addressing that kind of that ickiness that comes with tiki and these big questions of cultural appropriation and wokeness and all that stuff that we're dealing with constantly. But you know, in tiki it's funny because there's people who are on all sides of the spectrum. Some people think we shouldn't use the word tiki and should burn all tiki bars to the ground. And others are very purist and say if you don't have a carved tiki in your tiki bar, it's not a tiki bar. So and we have all ends of the spectrum, and really it's an interesting soup of opinions. But we're just kind of exploring what the contemporary landscape of tiki or tropical bars is right now.
And I hope a kind of love of tiki has snuck into your own life.
Oh, I mean, this all started because we have a home tiki bar. That's not really a tiki bar, but we were trying to figure out how to make it not a bad appropriative space and started doing research on it and found this whole like sort of conversation already existed in the world.
Wow.
But yeah, as you can imagine, Talking Tiki has a lot of interviews. It is not an observational.
So that would be hilarious. Well, all right. I'm so looking forward to both of those. So we are fingers crossing for those going well. Though you're already done shooting the burrow one, and you must be, well along in the tiki one. So
we're getting there.
Looking forward. All right. I think that's it. I think we're going to end on that note, which is a very hopeful one, I think, for documentaries. I want to see anyway. So that's it for the episode we are calling Straying into Documentaries. Thank you, dear listeners. And of course, triple thanks to our subscribers who keep us in. I did not know what to say. Keep us in what? Rescue dogs? I don't know. We both have rescue dogs.
Maybe Mistress Dispellers.
Mistress Dispellers. There you go.
And
You never know when you might need one. Exactly. If you're not a subscriber yet, but you like what you hear, please consider signing up for Patreon for all the film site content instead of just the half that's available to the public. Please note that half of our episodes are now available to view on YouTube, including this one starting August 12th. And you can follow news of the podcast on Facebook, Instagram, and Blue Sky. So join us in 2 weeks for more fabulous film site conversation. And again, Dolores will be back and can tell us all about how opera's doing in the world now that we've checked in with documentaries. Until then, thanks as always for joining us. And bye now.
Bye.
Asali, thank you again.
Bye. Thanks for having me.